want me. Fish want me. You want me. What am I? That's right, Lord Pythar's amazing debut merchandise, available for pre-order now. Join the long-held tradition of sharing your spiritual beliefs in the world using an adhesive sticker. With fancy gold foil detailing, everyone will know you're in a classier level of organisation. You'll receive 2 nifty designs that show your deep devotion to the order. Have you ever thought to yourself, I like my wrist, but I wish it was cooler and more colourful? Well, think no more, with new Pythar Charm wristband. Comes with 2 shiny silver charms in either bracelet or foam strap form. Your wrist will be the talk of the town. If you find yourself forgetting who saved your soul, then you need Pythar and Dilbert acrylic standee. This shiny depiction of our Lord and Saviour is just 8 centimetres tall, perfect for any desk, mantelpiece or shrine altar. Pre-order the full set and receive a bonus letter and decorative card signed by Lord Pythar himself. Only £20 plus postage and packaging.
This is Nurse that shows drafts of products. Final items may slightly differ.
Hello. Hi. Hang on. Put my noise suppression on because my dishwasher is on. Cozy dishwasher. To be fair, you probably can't hear it anyway. Okay. I can't sleep, so I'm gonna read you a bedtime story. Don't worry, I'm not gonna read it from behind the bookshelf. I'll go to my reading zone. Here I am. Not very good at positioning the book. I promise I'm holding a book. Very legit. Okay. So I'm gonna read stories from the Hypnagogic archives today. I've read some of them, but I haven't read all of them. We'll see how many we read. We might only read one, and then it'll be bedtime. But just until I'm tired, I thought I would read some stories with you. So I'll go back to the menu. This is the menu of stories, and I'm going to read first Call and Response, Trial and Error. They are spooky stories. I don't know if I put that in the description. I edit the description after we've gone live. Warning, slightly scary stories. Oh, whoa. There you go. Okay. They're generally not like super scary. Move my microphone closer to my face. Although that might stop my tracking from working. Let's move the tracking down here. Now you can see my face. Oh, my head. Ouch. Oof, ouch. Okay. I read you the book. Call and Response, Trial and Error. It was around June this year, and I was at soccer practice. My parents had dropped me off, and they said that they wouldn't be coming back because they had to pick up my little brother, Kevin. So I'll be walking home. This was fine. It was nice out, and I live in a pretty nice neighbourhood. Not a gated community or anything, but I've read in the local magazines that our crime rates are low. So I planned on playing for about 2 hours and then leaving. About an hour in, though, it started to rain, so we were called off the field and went under the bleachers to wait it out. The coach told us that if it didn't stop in 10 minutes, practice would be over, and most of us were tired enough that we wanted it to be over, so that wasn't upsetting, all things considered. Not very loud, so I'm going to turn my rain down. Okay. The rain didn't let up, and we all went to the locker room to change. And someone loaned me their umbrella. I don't remember who, but it was jet black, the kind you bring to funerals. I carried it out and started walking home. It was hard to see because the air was filled with mist, but I was able to make out the street signs if I squinted. Everything was a blur, and the streets were mostly empty. It was only late afternoon, but it was dark. It looked like night. I kept going and zipped up my jacket. Felt kind of like I was drowning and my umbrella was a diving bell. You could see them in old books sailors used before submarines. Just a little bit of air in there for the passenger to breathe, but what they didn't know back then is that you can't breathe your own breath forever, because with each cycle of your lungs it becomes less oxygen and more carbon dioxide. It was like that. Even though I had the umbrella, I was still soaked. There were puddles on every corner because there wasn't very good drainage. I kept walking in the direction I thought home was, but it was hard to tell. At this point, all the houses and streets looked the same, and I was lost. I sat down underneath an awning and took a candy bar out of my bag. I decided it would be smart to wait until the rain stopped. I was sure that I could see better. I would be able to tell which way was home. I don't get lost easily, and I have a good sense of direction, and I know my neighbourhood. It's not even that big of a neighbourhood, definitely not the biggest one in our city. Has my face stopped moving? It has. That's helpful. Thank you, face. 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 Okay, cool. Where did we get to? I'll start from the paragraph. I sat down under an awning and took out a candy bar from my backpack. I decided it would be smart to wait until the rain had stopped. I was sure that I could see better, and I would be able to tell which way home was. I don't get lost easily, and I have a good sense of direction. And I know my neighbourhood. It's not even that big of a neighbourhood, definitely not one of the biggest in our city. I sat for a while and thought about passing the time with my Game Boy, but decided it would get ruined in the weather, so I didn't. It seemed like I waited forever there, waiting for the rain to go on and on. The drops were big and fat, and the clouds were full of them. All I could see from where I was the sidewalk and the curb. Everything past that was a grey mess, and the rain went down the gutter in a little river. Finally, the rain gave out. By this point, it was late at night and the streets were dark. At least I could see the houses now. The clouds rumbled a little more, but soon they evaporated and the moon came out. I still didn't recognise any streets, though. They had names I wish I could remember. I had never walked in the city very much, so I knew I had turned around somewhere. Or maybe I'd walked past my house. I wasn't tired, though, so the night was young. If I hurried, I thought, I could make it back in time for dinner, and my folks wouldn't know anything was up. These houses weren't any I recognised. The porch lights were on, with about half of them. A lot of them were completely dark. Some of them were on the hills, located up a flight of stairs. This wasn't my neighbourhood. In my neighbourhood, the houses are all located on the ground, and the elevation is pretty flat. To add to this confusion, the sidewalk was very wet and it was reflective, meaning my eyes were bombarded by a light show. Something didn't feel right. The streets just kept repeating, and so did the houses. Eventually, I knew if I walked far enough, I would reach a main street or a landmark or something, so I just kept going. I knew about the suburban sprawl, or how in lots of suburbs, all the houses looked the same. About a year ago, I visited my grandparents who lived across the state. They live in one of those suburbs where every house is identical, and you can only tell the difference by their address. This was different, though. Like in my neighbourhood, all the houses look different. They all have different attributes and features. Some were bigger, and they all looked fancy. But some had patios and some didn't, and some have garages and some didn't. One had lawn sculptures and one had a fountain in the yard. It was bubbling, but I didn't see anyone around. It was like a street was being generated randomly by a computer algorithm right at the horizon, and that these houses were randomized while I walked past them. Some of them didn't make any sense. They were just possibilities stuffed together, like 3 stories mashed together in an ugly way that no one would buy. Like all Sims houses. The moon didn't move either, or if it did, I didn't notice. I was getting tired, so I looked around in my backpack for something to eat. I had corn nuts and half a sandwich, and I ate both of those. I had a lot of homework to catch up on, but tonight I wouldn't be able to finish it. I'd have to put it off and go right to sleep with how tired I was. I figured if nothing else was wrong, then I should be on the outskirts of civilization by now. But the houses just kept going and the streets kept going. I made a few turns right and left now and again to see if I could find a restaurant or something, but nothing changed. The only cars were parked and there was nobody in them. Hang on, I read that wrong. The only cars out were parked and there was nobody in them. I thought about going up to one of these houses and asking if I could use the phone, but when I tried, nobody answered the door. I realized that these houses were empty. Maybe the whole world was empty. Maybe I was losing it. I sat for a while on the sidewalk trying to collect myself. Whatever time it was late and I felt fatigued. After walking some more, I noticed out the corner of my eye that someone was following me. I could hear their steps on the concrete. I thought I heard breathing, but I wasn't sure. I could have asked them where I was, but I knew somehow that they were a threat, and they weren't here to help. They got closer, I turned around, saw who it was, and then I started running as fast as I could. I could hear my heart caught in my throat and my lungs were going to explode. They were dressed in a dark trench coat and had a hat on, a dark hat. They looked kind of like the man on the neighbourhood watch signs. That's always freaked me out from a young age. I couldn't see who it was. It was probably a guy. They were moving slowly, but walking towards me all the same. I couldn't see their face. Then I remembered something my friend Kate had told me a while ago. That when she was asleep, a man with a hat would stand in her room and watch her. Not do anything, or even move, really. Just stand and watch her aggressively. Sometimes he was accompanied by other characters. I think she was dreaming all this stuff, but I can't be sure. It reminded me of that, and I wondered if I was dreaming this person up. I don't know how you can watch someone aggressively. That's quite funny. Let's drink water. There were no alleys on this block, so there wasn't anywhere for me to hide. I turned right and left and right again, hoping I would throw the hat man off my trail. But I looked over my shoulder and he came walking out from the side. He was distant, but he was real, and I didn't want to get any closer to find out more. It seemed as if he was playing with me, that he knew he would catch up to me eventually because I was walking quick and using all my energy up while he walked slow and leisurely. He knew there was nowhere I could go because I wasn't close to anywhere. Maybe he was behind this illusion or whatever it was. The hat man, I'm almost sure it wasn't a woman, was around 6 feet tall, and his movements were smooth. He glided down the sidewalk without revealing what he had hiding under his coat, which was buttoned from his neck to his waist. Around his waist he had on a belt. I didn't see anything else from where I was standing. He was always about half a block behind me. My throat was dry and irritated. My feet were going as fast as they could, but somehow he always caught up. I decided that since there weren't any alleys or ravines I could hide in, the best course of action would probably be to go up to one of the houses and beg to be let in. And if they wouldn't let me in, I would break in and find somewhere to hide. I was sure that if the Hat Man caught up to me, he would kill me. So I scrambled up the steep hill in front of one of these houses. It was set back from the street. I knocked over a lawn flamingo on the way to the porch, and when I got there, I knocked and yelled. I could hear music playing from inside, so I thought someone might be there, and my spirits were lifted. The lights were on inside. All I could see through the shutter. The lights were on inside, all I could see through the shutter, but I thought if the lights were on, someone must have turned them on. The Hat Man was almost on me now. He was climbing up the stairs out front, so I decided to make my move and break the glass window. I picked up the chair that was on the porch and slammed it into the window, breaking glass everywhere. I climbed in. I realised that the window was open, so if the Hat Man could get in. I looked around the room with a lock in it. Oh, gosh. I realised that the window was open, so the Hat Man could get in. So I looked around for a room with a lock on it. I saw what had been making the music, a CD player in the corner, but no one was using it. Something was not right about the house. It didn't feel like anybody lived here. Sure, there was furniture and a carpet and lights, but it didn't really have anything human about it. It was as if though these items had been set here by something cold and emotionless. I ran upstairs and looked around. Again, something about the house was wrong. The rooms were just slightly wrong. You got the feeling in this house that it had been artificially created. I went back downstairs and slid the couch around until it covered the window. The Hat Man hadn't come in. Maybe he'd given up. I locked the front door and looked for a phone. There was one on the table. I dialed it, but all I heard was the busy signal. I pressed the buttons, but they did nothing. The phone wasn't connected. I decided my best bet would probably be to barricade myself in the bathroom until help arrived or the people who owned the house, if there were any, got back and noticed the window was broken. I stopped by the kitchen to look for food, but the shelves and the cabinets were empty, and the fridge had nothing. When I turned the taps on, no water came out. At this point, I heard someone coming through the front room, so I locked the door into the bathroom and hid behind the curtain. Everything was quiet, but I knew the Hat Man was out there, and he was looking. I sat there for a long time, just breathing and waiting. I kind of zoned out eventually. The walls faded out, and the footsteps faded away, and the light went down. I guess the Hat Man had given up. He wasn't going to bother me anymore. Maybe this world wasn't his construction. I got sick of sitting there, but I didn't want to go out the door. It was a gradual process. I disassociated from reality, and my head hit the edge of the tub, and I stared at the door and hoped I would get out soon. I stared at the door and hoped I would get out soon. In an hour, I slept. Let's drink more liquids. Reading makes your mouth dry. Didn't know if you knew. I woke up the next day, and on the side of the road, nobody had noticed me there. But there were people around, and this street looked normal enough. It was bright, and I was sure I was late for school at this point, but I didn't care. I was dirty and exhausted, and I wanted to go home and sleep more. I knew my parents would yell at me. I checked the signs, and I knew where I was. I ran home as fast as I could. I was incredibly happy when I saw my house. It looked the same as it had when I left it, although by now it felt like an eternity. It was also distant in some way. I ran up the walk and stopped when I noticed my parents were sitting on the porch. My dad was holding a beer in one hand and looking out into the distance. My mother was sitting next to him on the wicker chair, similarly expressionless. I went up to talk to them. I waved my hand in front of my father's face, but he didn't say anything. My mum asked to go inside, and he said she could. I went inside with her, and I saw my little brother Kevin crying in front of the TV. He was watching some kind of puppet show. Mum put an arm around him and told him everything would be okay. She told him that they would do anything for him, but he kept crying. He was going like a faucet. He was going like a faucet. My dad came inside and put My dad came inside and put an arm around them both, and that was when I realised that something was off. I put my hand through the furniture. I was dead. I was a ghost in my own house. I couldn't walk up to the second floor. My legs passed straight through the stairs. If our house had a basement, I probably would have fallen into it. I shouted at them, tried consoling them, but they were distraught and crying, and I sat there and watched. I wasn't safe. It hadn't ended. My family was going through trauma and grief, and all I could do was stand by and watch. It was a terrifying moment that still keeps me up at night. No angel came for me, but the Hat Man did. He saw this grief and came towards the house, hiding his face all the while. I tried shutting the door, but that didn't work. My hand went through it. My parents didn't see him, but he saw me, and I saw him. We existed in the same plane. My parents and my house weren't safe. Step by step he came along, and then from under the brim of his headpiece I saw his eyes, shimmering, flickering things that glinted in the midday light like a hungry cat's eyes. Then the world snapped back and I was playing soccer again. No Hat Man. People could see me and I was fine. I wasn't dead. I was alive, and it was the same day, and there was no rain. After the game, I walked home and I thought about what I had been. After the game, I walked home and I thought about what I had been through. I think this is what drug trips are like. Out-of-body experiences must be like this. I got home and I wasn't late. My parents weren't grieving, and my brother Kevin is annoying as ever. I feel like this story isn't worth anything because ultimately I never learnt anything. Nothing in my life has changed. I feel like an experience as bad as this should make me feel something, make me think my decision's over. Maybe I'm a sociopath. Maybe I'll be the Hat Man when I grow up. Maybe I'll become the master of space and time, and I'll create realities where I can chase my past self through the streets I dreamed up. Maybe I'll torture my prey. Or maybe not. Maybe that's all there is to it. I hope you liked this story. I probably won't post any more, because to be honest, my life isn't that interesting, and I don't have any more stories to tell. That's the story called Call and Response, Trial and Error. I'm glad he made it home. That'd be pretty scary, though, if you were playing football and then you were being chased by a man, and then you were dead. I'll try and do one more. I haven't read this one before. It comes with a picture. Let me put the link in. You can go look at the picture if you want. How long is this one? It's not too bad. I learned a long time ago that life doesn't always work out the way you want it to. Since I learnt that, I lived my life according to that principle. That the world is cold and remorseless place, and sometimes when things don't work out how you want them, you'll have to go in and smooth out the edges and bend reality to your liking. The first time I learnt that was when I was 22 and living out in the middle of Idaho. I wanted to be seen by people for something. I wanted to be seen as an expert on things. There wasn't a lot to do in Boise, so I went to all the local bars and restaurants, stage productions, tried gathering information on anything I could to fill my brain with knowledge it to fill my brain with the knowledge it craved. I read dozens of books on how to meet people, self-help guides from some of the leading experts in the field. But no matter how I tried to change who I was, whenever I approached some guy at happy hour, he would always get this weird look on his face and go talk to some other girl. It got so repetitive I almost grew accustomed to it. When I saw Steve at the AST conference in 1998, everything changed. I could divide my life according to that one event, the moment I caught a glimpse of him behind the row of sparkling new AST monitors. He was a dream, a strong jawline, impeccably dressed. You could tell his mind was set on a goal. He was going places, up in the world, the kind of man I had been raised believing I was entitled to. I lived with my aunt. She was a bitter old thing, and most days I avoided her presence, which permeated the lower level of our house. I wanted Steve to understand, if he agreed to date me, that I was my own person, with goals and ambitions as lofty as his. That if we were to become a pair, we would be the talk of Boise, innovators in the field. I checked out several books from the library on programming, just so, if the subject ever arose during one of our conversations, I would feel relatively confident on the terminology and lingo. For several days, I wondered why Steve wouldn't answer me, why he wouldn't bend to my will, why my efforts bore no fruit. My mind was as compressed as a ball of aluminum foil. I just said aluminum. My mind was as compressed as a ball of aluminium foil, and the logic of the game Steve appeared to be playing eluded me. They say everything in life, even the blatantly negative, is a learning experience, an opportunity to rectify one's mistakes. Steve's death was suddenly one of those negative events. If I had been there, I told myself, to console him in his darkest hour, sitting before the AST monitor, viewing my romantic pleas up close, he probably would have understood what he had been missing. But he was selfish, and he put his own life over my happiness. And in doing so, he taught me a valuable lesson, that nothing in life is easy. If you want something, it will be an uphill battle of persistence and confidence. It seems like unaliving might be a theme in this story, so if that's difficult for you, just a heads up. I quickly put Steve out of my mind and became more resolute and iron-willed. And I no longer worried about whether men found me attractive. What they thought or said about me behind my back was without form and void. I lived a secretive and furtive life here on the internet, investing in speculative bubbles before they burst, posting on forums under various pseudonyms, always with an inquisitive tone. I wanted something more in life, something beyond the confines of Boise, and my mind was like an absorbent rag. It continued soaking up the knowledge. Sometimes I feared my brain would spill open. It was carrying so many fields of study. I got migraines often and went to sleep at 9 p.m. My aunt told me, "Chloe, one of these days I'm going to have a stroke, and I won't be here to take care of you anymore." We had tea in the evenings, which was usually our only real time of reconciliation, and I cared little whether or not she had a stroke. She had a circulatory condition which made her veins unusually pronounced. She sat like a vulture over her food, and a stringent buzzard to the carrion. She died in 2000, 2 days after the new millennium rang in. I remember it because I had woken up and I'd looked out the window and felt the rays of the dawn on the shag carpet. And when I opened the door, there was a permeating sense of death about the house. And I knew even before I entered the room and gazed at her dishevelled corpse on the sheets that the inevitable had come to pass. Time marches on, and none of us are privileged enough to escape death. That's what I thought. I had been told that around Boise from a very young age, and I have never stopped to question whether it was really true, whether you could not cheat death. I mulled this over as her cold, dead, buzzard pupils pierced past mine. Clearly, she hadn't been as crafty as I. I pulled the covers over her and called the police. I filled out the funerary paperwork and I attended her funeral a month later. And as the Reverend read from his pocket-sized scripture, I made plans for the future and made sure that if I were to go out, it would not be with a whimper. Finally, scanning the pages of local events, desperate to escape the now empty property, looking for anything to do besides sulk around the lifeless hallways and staircases, I happened upon an advertisement for a speech which was to be given by a member of the secretive mystic group known as the Clade at every same conference hall where I had seen Steve for the first time only 2 years prior. The speaker, Bayard Macy, was convinced he had lived from the inception of the universe to its death, in various forms as various things, and furthermore that he had achieved this process multiple times over, and had essentially cracked the code to immortality. And anyone could do as much, he said, if only they heeded his call. I took one glance at his picture and decided if anyone had the capacity to live forever, it was him. I immediately rang the conference hall up and purchased a ticket to the event. It was surreal, I will admit, to walk into the same room where the love of my life had been standing, and not be greeted by a row of those familiar AST-designed processors. The room looked very different, with rows and columns of folding chairs set up all in formation, all towards the stage. The ceiling was low, and the lights were dim. I grabbed a seat near the front, in the second or third row, to see his master conjurer, this immortal being. The room went dark, and he stepped onto the platform in an unassuming suit. A fog machine backstage billowed a cloud upon cloud onto his cheap business shoes, and then from behind the curtain came a device. A spherical-looking glass thing, with wires and buttons attached to it. This was the time sphere, a device which functioned as much other time machines did, with one crucial difference. The time sphere had been through so many paradoxes, according to the brochure we had been given at the door, and so many logic-defying self-fulfilling prophecies that it was on the verge of complete failure. It certainly looked that way. One side was badly scarred, microscopic cracks were beginning to form on its exterior, and Mr. Macy lifted the hatch and sat inside and rubbed his hands all over the leather seat, which was similar to a cockpit of a fighter jet. I didn't realise this was big enough to sit in. Okay. I know because my aunt has taken me to an air show when I was 8, and I had been able to sit in an authentic B-52, and I came to realise how comfortable it was, and how that comfort was necessary when your vehicle was careening around the sky at breakneck speeds that could bend the laws of sound and sight. Macy pulled a small microphone from his vest and looked at it, and then, with a dry wheeze, from within the time sphere, he said in the ancient voice, "Wow, you all showed up." Polite laughter, some clapping, all people with dead stares and very little movement. It was like sitting in the middle of a wax museum. I was out of my element, though there was something about Macy's disposition that kept me spellbound, held me to the cheap plastic folding seat and the nylon rug. "I'm on my way back to home base," he said, grinning ear to ear with that timeless bliss. "Sharon, I make a lot of runs between Seattle and Sharon, you know. Spread the word, got to go, spread the word. My work is never done. I always run into some people who tell me I'm crazy. If I was crazy, I would have given up a long time ago. But I keep on, and I've learned a lot through many lifetimes. One is that people don't want to believe something. You can't convince them. How many things through many lifetimes?" I messed that up. One sec. "You can't convince them. How many things Have you told your family, co-workers about this year, and they wouldn't believe you?" A few hands shot up, mostly in the back, and he pointed at them, still concealed by the confines of that eternal device. And then something unexpected happened. His eyes glowed red, and he looked positively evil. The hands shot back down, the silence fell over the crowd, and he calmed down and folded his wrinkled talons over each other, as if he was a perfectly normal man and these were perfectly ordinary circumstances. "I need a volunteer for this next part," he said. "This will convince any of you who have any doubts, anyone at all." Without really thinking, I shot up out of my seat and spread my arms wide, feeling the energy of the moment take me into rapture. He lifted me into the hatch and scanned the rows and columns of the seated individuals. Something inside his all-knowing mind clicked, and with his outstretched claw, he pointed at me. "You! Yes, girl, you come up!" I rose, rather levitated into the shiny wooden stage, and he held my hand up, and I smiled. "She's going to demonstrate this for us. Now you take pictures of this. If you afford to bring cameras, I guarantee you that you'll all see after this, and you can go home and tell your family off, because this is going to make you believe." He sat down in front of me and he sat me down in the device and closed the hole. I felt as if I was held in a womb of the universe, the break in the oven of creation. From the outside came a few flashes and clicks as the observers shouted, and Macy tapped on the glass and asked if I was all right. I remember how terrifying it was to sit in the cockpit of a jet, and even if that jet wasn't going to take off with me inside it, I was about to journey into the cosmos. He faced the crowd and lifted his arms. This mad sermon alight with life, and then he whirled around with more energy than a man of his physique should ever been able to muster. "Where would you like to go?" he asked politely. I had infinite possibilities before me. My brain began to ache as I considered them. He may have been of infinite age, however, he was not of infinite patience. He tapped his foot, and impulsively I answered, 1992. I said from behind that protective barrier. Boise, right here, 1992. He appeared confused as I was when I said it. But I had said it, and when you make decisions, you can't always go back on your word. Certainly not in this case, so I stared straight ahead, hands gripping the rails on either side of the set, and before me the screen of the apparatus lit up with a green computerized text. And Macy pulled a small device from his jacket, and the crowd sat in petrified wonder as he raised it, and set his bone-dry index finger on the button of an oblong device. And in the blink of an eye, he lowered it, and I could faintly make out a noise it made, the final noise I would hear in that iteration of the year 2000. Sip, sip, sip. Stay hydrated. It is difficult to describe the process of being displaced in the casual ribbon. Suffice it to say that Macy's voice echoed throughout the process, and when I arose from that technicolor soup of noise and pastel, it was 1992, and I was standing in the middle of Boise as it had been a few years prior, before I had met Steve, before my aunt had died. I felt rejuvenated, resurrected, and I believed that, with the aid of the time sphere and with the additional hindsight, that I could live my life over again and avoid the mistakes that had led me to such a melancholic state of being. I ran down the streets and observed how much it can change in 8 years. It's a very gradual and nondescript ordeal, the transformation of one's environment. However, the Boise I had left no longer existed, and here I was, here and now, to create a brighter future for myself. My mood was ruined when I saw my 16-year-old counterpart standing on the porch, in that terrible fashion I once wore. It hadn't occurred to me until then that her presence here was inescapable. Her clothes were gauche and without substance, and her eyes were bitter as she beheld what she would eventually become, and I returned her gaze in equivalent contempt. We stood on either side of the fence for some time. I observed her like a snarling beast in a cage, and she observed me like a callous zoo-goer. The experience must have been eerie and jarring for us both, though more for her. "Who are you?" The question rolled off her tongue like citric acid, echoed over the reflective buildings and the facades of Boise, which were now a deep amber from the setting sun. I wanted to snap her neck there and then. I hated the little thing so much. But I displayed tact and reservation. Without saying a word, I darted off in the direction I had arrived from and spent hours walking alone downtown, with no means of returning to my own time and place. I was a castaway on the ocean of time. Little by little in that nocturnal summer ambience, as the shop turns all their lights off one by one, and the trees by the edge of the sidewalk swayed gently back and forth, Macy's voice found its way through the ethers of times to me, and filled my head until I could no longer ignore it or dismiss it as a figment of my overwrought imagination. I sat on a small green bench, and Macy asked, "Are you happy? Is this what you wanted?" Yes, it was. Well, it is still. I can't say I hate it. I hate her, though. I hate them all. "Why don't you do something about it, Chloe?" came his rustic drawl. I could picture him even now in the Sharon Lodge, pressing his fingers to his temples in that overstated business suit, taking the time out of his day to help me with my problems. He was a wise and venerable man. Even now, all these years later, that cannot be denied or ignored. "What can I do?" I responded quietly, muttering vague platitudes under my breath. "I'm all alone here, nobody to talk to. Not her, neither of them." "You could kill them," Macy said, reverberating throughout my skull. "That's what I always do when I don't get things my own way. I erase people. In the name of my own interests. Time is like any other resource, Chloe. When you get right down to it, exploitable, profitable, to be utilized for one's own personal gain. If I can do it, surely you can." And as his last statement reverberated into the darkness, my sights caught the corner drugstore. The drugstore which had gone bankrupt in 1995, but was still here in 1992, still operating, as always, trusty and reliable. Still open with lit windows and that chalk-white interior, for 5 more minutes. 5 minutes during which I could purchase certain drugs, certain prescription drugs, for my aunt. Jeez. She was found the next morning, having suffered a quiet, painless death, which was ruined by the police to be which was ruled by the police to be from natural causes. They never even looked for traces of small white capsules that I had dropped into her glass of bedside water the night previous, when she and my former self would have been fast asleep. And if I looked 8 years older, mysteriously to them, they didn't show it. Surely they wouldn't accuse me of being some sort of imposter. Not after the trauma I had endured following the death of my loved one. My past self I had to use slightly different methods on. She was feisty, put up a fight beneath my hand. I worried that if she were to die, I would be erased. Yet Macy had said that such issues did not matter, that time could be exploited at will with no consequence. She squirmed and writhed as I held her lips shut to ensure that no screaming came from her lips. She barely objected, in fact, while I tied her, dragged her screaming and kicking into the basement, her eyes swollen, filling with tears. I looked into them, and I saw a bit of myself in them. That bit would need to go, I reasoned. Forever. She said nothing as I plugged in the screwdriver and began spinning. I would expect her to say something. I hadn't taped her mouth, but she only stared across at me, in dead silence, as we sat with some kind of mirror image on chairs opposite each other, framed only by a single light bulb. She without free agency, and I with. I felt catharsis as the driver bore into her skull. An easy way to go. Lights out, one puncture wound to the brain. I treated it with epoxy from the carpentry table to ensure no blood spilled out. And then, in a long, giddy process that occupied most of the night, I took a shovel in the corner and used it to pry up the floorboards. Placed my counterpart gingerly into an airtight plastic bag to prevent the odours from wafting up, and then set the floorboards back down again. Hammered with extra nails into them, and then covered up the spot with a large crate. Truth be told, I was exhausted and sleep-deprived when the police showed up, and I told them how I found my lifeless aunt, probably helped by my performance, and strengthened my feigned grief. As Macy had assured me, no consequences came. I didn't vanish from existence, the fabric of reality didn't dissolve. I sat on the front porch, sipping an ice-cold $1 tea from the gas station down the street, and eating my favourite flavour of Pringles, which have, for now, for whatever reason, been taken off the shelves. I felt akin to a goddess. Macy continued to speak through me, as he told me his adventures from the inception of the universe to its destruction. He told me his infinite lifespan, his accomplishments in organising the clade, his many transgressions against the preconceived temporal logic. He said he had been born in Sharon, Kansas, in 1926. It was a different 1926, however, and the one that I had known was only the result of his actions, his decisiveness, and his will. He had grown from the dust bowl to a paratemporal deity. I could become a strange goddess equivalent to him, he told me, if I trusted my decisions, displayed no regard for the welfare of those around me, and prioritised my survival above all else. I could survive anything. But I could not display doubt. This, he assured me, was key. Doubt was the termite which gnawed at will. It weakened one's resolve. To doubt one's actions would be to undermine the efficacy of those actions. And so, with the assistance of the voice in my head, I resolved to have Steve. Again, nothing was going to keep me from him now. Gee, Steve must be hot, huh? March 12th, 1998 arrived, and I woke up early in the dawn. I put on my best clothes and head down to the AST conference. Though I was older now, close to my 30s by my estimate, although birthdays were no longer a certainty, I felt as if the brisk walk was a ritual of sorts. An ordeal had been made to suffer for the last 6 years. This was the payoff, the culmination, my second chance. Even if I brought a watch for the occasion, timed it such that I would be in the hall 5 minutes earlier, Steve wouldn't be pulled back by his friend. He would come over to me and say hello, and then we would leave the hall together. All that blood on my hands was going to be washed clean. All the pain and effort would be worth it. I would have everything my way because I knew what was going to happen, and I could prevent it from happening as it had. I was on my way now. Yes, Chloe, Macy said from the deep recesses. Atta girl. When I saw Steve amid the row of luminescent computer monitors, I felt a wash of euphoria sweep over me. In rapture, I approached him, waggling my fingers. He was every bit as approachable as I had envisioned. A wide smile spread across his face. When I spotted his friend approaching him from across the aisle, I put my hand around his back and moved him to a display where he would be alone. "Who are you?" he asked. He had a gorgeous build, looked like a football player with a full mane of hair and precisely uniformed. And a precisely ironed uniform. Of all the conceivable permutations, I had been led here. This was the end of an inevitable process. "Chloe," I responded dreamily. "Chloe Richards, just a local." He shrugged and pulled away from him. I grabbed him again by the collar this time and looked deep into his mind, furtive, scanning, nervous. I had to end the uncertainty because uncertainty bred doubt. Remember the tenets. "Listen, Steve," I said, and he flinched ever so slightly when he heard his own name. "If you're here and you want to know some of the best spots to eat or hang out, call me. Just call me, think about it." And with that, I plucked a ballpoint pen from his shirt pocket and grasped his hand, inscribing my phone number onto his palm. He was mine now. And then I left without saying anything. Let to him decide whether or not to contact this mystery woman. I spent a long while that night reflecting on my method, gazing out of the attic window at the nocturnal Idahoan activity, tapping my fingers, waiting desperately for the phone to ring off the hook. Out on the horizon, cars wound their way around the hills and towards Dry Creek Valley or Schaefer Butte, and the lights disappeared as they rounded the curves. I imagined the roads were timelines and the cars were people, and that I was witnessing firsthand from a bird's eye view the extent of temporal mechanics. The phone rang and I answered it, and I waited with hesitant sighs. If Steve didn't say yes, I decided, in that split second before he spoke, I would kill him. "Hi, Chloe," he said, warm and friendly. "Just thought I would reach out. Listen, is there some place we could meet up tonight?" My mind raced. It was close to 11 p.m. and most places were closed. "There's this bench," I said without a second thought. "I'll swing by your place and pick you up and we can walk down there. You're at the Holiday Inn, right?" "Yeah, I'll be standing by the third entrance." And just like that, the line went dead. My mind raced with possibilities of the future. The glorious future. The future wouldn't have been possible without Macy's time sphere. Praise the Clade. I put on some shoes and took the last bus to the hotel, and I skipped my way to the entrance where he was standing, leaning against the lock, hands in his pocket, casual and prepared. I slid my arm around him and we strolled through the parking lot and towards the street. I was in ecstasy. He held my trembling fingers, visibly alarmed by my nervous disposition, gathering crow's feet, visible blemishes on the skin that in another time and place had been flawless. He had rejected it then, and as his lips began to open, in one terrifying instant I realized what he was about to say. And I froze on that small bench as the wind whistled through the trees in the dead of night. "Chloe, I'm married. I'm sorry." I know so far that I had been descriptive in many things I've related, up to and including the murder of my aunt and my alternate self. However, I remember very little of what happened then. Something about a rock, not a very big one, merely one of those ones you see lining the public thoroughfares, such as were on the one we were on. I remember its heft and density as I clutched it with my fingers, icy cold and brittle. I remember something about the noise it made when it grazed his skull. Apart from that, I recall very little. I don't, for instance, know what I did to clean the blood up from the asphalt. I don't know where his body is hidden, whether it's down in the basement with the others, or if I tossed it in a river, or discarded of it carelessly into the trunk of a nearby station wagon. All I can say for sure is once more, Mr. Macy, my only true friend throughout this perpetual ordeal, kept me safe from the watchful and ever-vigilant eyes of Boise's finest, and for that, despite whatever came later, I am forever grateful. I knew I had to leave Boise behind. Mace's voice guided me, subtly, to Colorado. It said, "Move to Colorado, start a new life. Blank slate, clean slate, nothing you've done matters, Chloe. It was all for nothing, so why worry about it?" In a stupor, a kind of subconscious daze, I gathered my things from outside. From outside came the glare of a police siren, passing through the neighborhood, those all too familiar popsicle lights on the walls. I had to run. I had to run farther than I ever had before. It may not have been Macy's voice, but rather a fragmented and internalized piece of my psyche, one with no boundaries or reservations. But it sounded like him, had that comforting musk, the tone of deep velvet armchairs and freshly baked bread. I heard it as I ran, sack in hand, through the hills of Idaho, the grassy knolls and the dimly lit stretches of road. It throbbed into a further extent when I hit Wyoming, made my way on foot beyond the shadowy monoliths of Bridgerton. By night, caught rides with grizzled truckers who would have likely tried something if I didn't appear insane. No, I was insane, I'll admit it. Rarely slept, only 2 outfits subsided on junk food for 3 months straight as I made my way towards the site of what was to become my life's work. I lay in ditches and listened to the voice in my head as he told me stories of the distant epochs, and all the while, Zira burned a fiery and all-consuming life into the heavens above, which rotated like a magnificent mural upon the ever-impenetrable nothing. I knew the sight when I saw it. It had been after 10 days of trekking down the Poudre Canyon, along the rim of the Front Range, coming upon towns with names which were foreign to me, in this frame of mind. Berthoud, Campion. None seemed adequate for the task Mr. Macy had been subtly hinting at. And as I approached the area, the idea took form. Like a completed jigsaw puzzle, effortlessly dawned on me. "I have enemies," he said. "My line of work, you know. If you have ever had to deal with the IRS, it's a bit like that. But they have a weakness. Surely you've read the stories about the dragons with the tender point at the neck. The giants with the bad foot, or whatever." We were sitting along Route 36, around 9 p.m. My eyes were drawn to the distant, sparkling lights of Longmont, which served as a beacon of civilization past the featureless crags and promontories which yawned up towards the sky. "We hunt them down whenever we write something," he whispered. "Take a picture, write a book. They scream, the little bastards actually scream like mice. I ever tell you about the time my dad set up a glue trap? It's true, lots worse than the other ordinary mouse traps. They die a quick and painless death with them, for the most part. But the glue traps, they're another matter. Dad came up to me with one, said, 'Just watch here, Baynard.' And I did. For hours I sat and waited, and eventually this little fucker came sniffing and smelled a treat. He lunged at it with his paws, all sticky and his fur got entwined, and he tried pulling out. Tried as hard as he could, but the excitement worked him up into a fervor. Organs ruptured, his little heart went splattering all over the place. kidney soon followed after and stopped moving. I didn't respond, tried gathering my own thoughts, pressed my index fingers against my temples and rubbed them. The lights on the horizon began to warp and shift into varying hues of purple. That's what these things need, Macy assured me. A slow death. Make the bastards scream because they just don't know what's good for them. We are pioneers of time, you and I are. Explorers of the new frontier. And the frontier is ours to desecrate. The next day, I looked into the property and spoke to the hygiene property office, picked up a cassette tapes and VHS tapes and 8-track tapes and helical scan and high 8 and super 8 from the Longmont Fripp store and carried them in a satchel to the building, which had originally been some sort of corn processing plant, but now stood vacant and empty. Perfect for utilization in this new endeavor. By nightfall, my first shelf was completed. It was soon followed. Oh, sorry. I need a drink. And now I'm trying to find my place. By nightfall, the first shelf was completed. It was soon followed by 3 more. I wondered whether or not the beings Macy had spoken of would approach me, and when. I sat awake, sleeping on the floor in the midst of that day's haul. The people at the thrift shop gave me strange looks as I made my daily trip to and from hygiene. Yet, soon enough, half the archival shed was filled. I was overjoyed, and I didn't have the faintest idea as to why. I found a few like-minded individuals in Boulder one night, while strolling past the Pearl Street Mall as a diversion. Aphasia and Scott were kind people, sitting aside a fountain which gurgled and sloshed, and I took advantage of their generosity and kindness. It was the first real contact I had made with anyone in over a year, and they were bored and tired of the present, and so I offered them a journey into the past. My eccentricities made a definite impression, and while I didn't think they would volunteer with no pay to spend 3 hours every weekday at the archival building, assembling electrical systems and filling out bureaucratic forms, they were on the front steps the next morning prepared for anything I laid ahead. I guided them like insects onto their work, and they were eager to oblige. It was almost eerie. They asked a few times who the president was, and I told him he had been funding this project. I was the president, of course, in theory, though Macy very well could have been. I took orders from him and became less of a pronounced entity and more so faded into my subconscious, integrated himself into my head. I was second into command to him, and I believed that we remained as long as we did in part due to his vision, his clarity, his accounting for every contingency. The years passed slowly, and the new millennium happened once again. I took little notice of it. I spent some of what remained of my money from Boise on state-of-the-art computers, servers, and infrastructure. Not from AST, of course. They had lost my business. Little by little, the organisation took shape, like a planetoid accruing debris to add to its own mass. I remained in the office and waited for any problems to arise, and none did for the most part. I wondered who the beings Macy spoke of had been, and devised attack plans in my head which I doodled onto notebook paper so I wouldn't forget. Still, attempting to remain in full control of my life, even if my life as I envisioned it had long since broken into a million tiny pieces. The climate was different here, and I soon realised. For our first winter, we put in insulation and high-grade windows, and during the many blizzard, I and Scott and Aphasia sat around and they told me about their courses at CU Boulder, what they were learning, and I listened idly while outside the world became a blank canvas of snow and icicles. Scott's speciality was local history. Aphasia was working her way up to earn a major in theatre. She was particularly fond of Shakespearean adage that all the world was a stage. She even kept a fridge magnet with the quote on her filing cabinet. More volunteers followed. I ensured that their schedules were flexible and that their time was valued. Stringing them along was the key, letting them see just enough of my ends that they'd understand what it was that they had to do. The pieces continued to fall into place. Our organisation was thriving. I remember the first time I saw one of those things. It's the sort of experience you never really forget. You have this jolt of adrenaline in your chest, starts pumping and palpitating, and you're overcome by a rush of intense guilt and remorse. That's what they do. They inspire pity in you, because they are pathetic when you get right down to it, slovenly and without grace. I had been expecting their arrival for some time, because the days were still quiet and the noontime haze had gathered over the entire town of Hygiene. Small little wooden shacks built from quaint oak where the locals spoke little and performed even less in the way of action. I remember Aphasia had been standing alongside me at one of the shelves in the middle of the shed, sorting copies of some defunct local magazine into boxes. All of a sudden she looked at me, and I got a sensation on the back of my neck, as if something had passed behind us. She had felt it too. "Chloe?" She screamed. Oh, sorry, she screamed. I won't scream. I won't ruin the ambiance. She screamed as the box with the magazines was torn from the shelf and careened onto the floor, whereupon it burst into flame. She ran for the fire extinguisher, and I, coughing into my elbow over the smoke and foam, tried consoling her while the tears ran down her face, and she aimed at the cinders with a wavering aim. She understood, at least somewhat, that I was privy to the source of the event, and she felt resentment towards me because I would not make the information as clear as she would prefer. "Asp," I said, clutching tightly at her elbow. "It's okay. You just dropped it, that's all." "It's a poltergeist," she said. "It has to be. I saw a TV special about them once. They're manifestations of a disturbed mind, energy manifest. Oh, God, whose mind is it? Mine? Am I doing this?" She was a mess of nerves, so I brewed a cup of chamomile tea for her in my office, where she collapsed onto my futon, exhausted from the effort with the extinguisher. "It's not that," I reassured her. "Not a poltergeist, anyway. I don't know what that was, but it's not you. You're fine. Calm down. Breathe." She took the cup and stormed out without saying another word, and we didn't discuss it after that. She may have seen the other from the corner of her eye, as I had, before it made itself invisible as they're known to do. I can't say for certain how much she was onto. The following years were filled with all manners of events, from execution of the Melrose Hypnofest to numerous staff changes we went through, to the construction of the facility's infrastructure. The archive was featured in several press outlets, and I had become less aware of who I had been in the previous timeline. It slowly left me, and I forgot about the smell of my dead body festering underneath the floorboards. She was still up there, I realised, even now, While my reputation grew and my domain broadened, the shadow of who I had been lay dormant, known to nobody but myself and Mr. Macy. It would need to stay that way. The next time I encountered an other, I had been at the archive late, shuffling through some tax returns, mindlessly lost in my own reverie. And the thing had manifested itself through the frame of my office door. I remained completely still, hoping that it would leave if I remained dormant. No such luck. It was massive, and it looked even worse than how Macy had described it. Covered in scales and bursting sores, little grey hairs over its mouth, from which protruded 2 mandibles coated in slime. And then the arms, they made a distinct sound, like bells attached to a cat's neck. A kind of cracking sound amounted to the irrefutable evidence of their presence. The same noise I heard in the cornfields when I was younger. Corn grows at such a fast rate that if you're standing in a large enough group of corn, you can hear it grow, little by little, inch by inch. As the thing's arms thrashed around, it ran towards me. I ducked under my desk and waited there in complete silence for about 5 minutes until it left. I assume it was probably blind or otherwise deprived of some sense to that effect. It was then, I think, around 2005, that I became fully aware of the danger I had been put in, and wondered what Mr. Macy was thinking when he sent me here. Still, I held out hope that maybe he had some sort of plan for combating the onslaught. The frequency of abnormal events increased by the week. I even kept track of them in my little calendar. We moved on, some of us left. Aphasia, in particular, became less optimistic about her own future. Her personality was altered significantly by her time here. Her once bubbly optimism was gradually usurped by a sour demeanour and a thankless dedication to my whims. I too was transformed in certain ways by the edifice which housed us. I became more conscientious around the temporal disturbances and made a greater effort to conceal them, not only from the staff, but from my own head in a sense, to deny them, to normalise the rapidity of which they had struck. Every shelf cracking open, every box ripped apart by unseen trans-dimensional hands, became an excuse to continue down the path I had chosen. You're probably wondering about the incident at the gas station. Call it luck, but that was the first time I spotted one of the bastards up close. It was staying close to the wall, letting out these pathetic gasps, and I saw her there, mindlessly indulging in copyright infringement. Could have spotted the citrus emerald from a mile away. I had been using it for about 6 months prior to that. Until my laptop started oozing purple liquid from the monitor. Seeing the application out in the wild made my blood seethe. I was impulsive, you're probably saying to yourself right now. Acted on a whim of selfless, spur-of-the-moment crusade and went in my line of work that's foolhardily. You're probably right. However, I hope I've made as clear as possible. Things don't always go the way you want. And if they don't, there's really no reason to adhering to a plan. I feel like that's the opposite of what she said at the beginning, but okay. I don't know what became of her after I drove out, whether the thing got her, but I did try to distract it. I pulled an 8-track cartridge I had been concealing under a tarp of the trunk for such an occasion. It reared up on its hind legs, arms shaking. I guess I know what they really sound like. Aspen leaves, golden coins fluttering in sharp wind. It charged at the car, but I led it around the block some, hoping it would be distracted enough to get the scent of lime wire. I hope my effort worked, because the thing whacked my tail light with one of those malformed appendages, and the next day I had to go in and get it repaired. And the guy at the shop asked me how it happened. I told it had been a tree branch, I don't think he bought it entirely. C'est la vie. The resentment I held toward the things was partially due to Mr. Macy's conditioning, and partially due to my own standards. The incidents just kept piling up, and with each one came a new challenge, one which I overcame using the resources at my disposal. It was difficult at first, although on my personal computer, behind a password, I created a file with a list of remedies and useful deterrents. They had weaknesses, I was sure of that. Silver bullets and wolfsbane. Above all, I tried to keep the spirits of the staff happy. By 2007, we had grown to around 15 strong, and our server space grew as these volunteers from Denver and Boulder, many of whose names elude me, brought in 3 equipment and genuinely believed in the cause. Then came the notoriety, what I would refer to as the golden period. We were covered in the national magazines, featured as one of the best resources on the internet. I was asked to drive all the way out to some studio in California to get some pictures taken. The pictorial declared us innovators and pioneers, selfless juggernauts who would sacrifice our time and energy into something so banal. It wasn't really, I told them. It was exciting, an adrenaline rush. Yes, they said in monochrome soundstage, with the pale screen behind me and the click of a Nikon ahead. Yes, it must really be like that. Polite laughter. I feared these confrontations, as each one increased the likelihood of our connection with the space being found out in some official capacity. Keeping a secret is difficult, especially when one's business model revolves around complete transparency. A group of tourists came by in 2008. Apparently we had been added to Boulder County's official list of desirable attractions. I politely dismissed them with a swish of my hand and the soft click of a screen door, and told them if they wanted, they could come back some other time. And warned the guide, I warned the guide in no uncertain terms that if the archive wasn't removed from the list, I'd go down to the county clerk's office myself and have a word with them. The publicity had another angle too. Amplified the odds of the police discovering those dead bodies. I hadn't changed my name. The house had probably been foreclosed, debt collectors and real estate agencies trying to hunt me down. I hadn't made the proper arrangements. I had just left it up there on the hill to rot. And the bodies in the basement probably smelled. Nobody could go down there without latching onto the rancid aroma of mildew. Along the course of my internet sleuthing, I discovered I don't know that word. Adipocere. Hang on. I'll Google it.
Adipocere.
Adipocere, a greyish, waxy substance formed by the decomposition of soft tissue in dead bodies subjected to moisture. Ah, well, it's not your everyday word then. I'll excuse myself from not knowing it. Along the course of my internet sleuthing, I learned of adipocere when I retired to my lodging at the Hygiene Motor Lodge every night, which I had been staying in at for nearly a decade by then, with few questions asked of me. I fell into a fitful torrent of dreams. During these episodes, I ran my hands into vats of adipocere, felt its creamy, slick texture along my flesh. Arm deep in the stuff, I squeezed it and grabbed it and painted my face with it. Became a real mess. That's what the archive is. It's adipocere. It's a timeless grave where things go to die. Every file, every list, is engulfed in grave wax. It defies temporal logic, as I had. It can make something 100 years long dead function normally, even if actual life is drained from it. And while my thoughts became consumed by the Adipocere, the archive itself decayed, fell into disrepair, and our staff fell from 15 to around 5, as it had been in the early days, and gradually we slipped back into irrelevancy and obscurity, there on the high moors surrounded by the hills and otherworldly landscape by night. Aphasia left in 2013. She didn't say anything. When she did, she just handed me her resignation early in the morning, which was reasonably well written and concise. She stood by while I skimmed through it, said something about her mind being occupied with other concerns, a feeling that she didn't belong. When I was done, I handed it back to her, and she shambled out. All life drained from her, all energy depleted towards the floppy disks and the microcassettes which sat untouched in the rows and rows of columns of memory. This is longer than I thought, but we're nearly finished. I'm just going to get more water so I don't choke on you. I had created something, some sort of entity. In my sleep, it took the form of a barrel whose opening was like a mouth with gnashing skeletal teeth, full of adipocere, an ocean of the stuff crumbling and shifting. The wood of the barrel, ancient and well built, with metal slats to hold it together. It was a man-built thing, created perhaps some ancient merchant in a faraway land, or a farmer who used it to water his crops in the waving billows of the fertile crescent, which weren't so different from the lands I found myself in today, environmentally speaking. The next bit is written weirdly, so I'll say it in a funny way, I suppose. Don't fear them, it said. They can't hurt you. From its recesses came the soft noise, the substance sloshing back and forth in those dark, hollow corners. It was reassuring, a respite from the brutal stress I had faced every day in my office. Weighed down by submissions and paperwork, I had very few resources left at my disposal. What do you expect me to do? I asked the barrel. I'm alone here, alone and afraid of what they'll do to me if they find me. They absolutely can hurt me. I've seen them. They have those claws. Calm yourself. What I'm about to tell you is vital, not only to your own survival, but to mine. Listen carefully. It proceeded to tell me about the nature of the others, that if I had never known about them, they never would have been able to find me, that if I ignored their presence, they would diminish, and that I could condition my mind so as to diminish the threat they posed, such that they could not injure me or harm me. Mind over matter, raw human will over tangible opposition. The more I gazed at those deep folds of corpse fat, the more it made sense. I bought books, incense, rituals, and incantations on meditation and how to clear the mind, how to induce a trance state of near catatonia, slow my breathing and heart rate down to 5 per minute, to change the sorts of brain waves I had completely of my own accord, to switch from theta to gamma and back again. I learnt how to distinguish between NREM and REM sleep, stuffed an entire corner of my office with neurological papers, and spent hundreds of nights recording myself sleeping. These sleep recordings were critical. Every night upon my arrival at the grounds, I would play one tape of myself recorded over the roughly 8 hours I slept each night. I spent 8 hours glued to the TV, watching in real time as my brain entered those subconscious realms, with the adipocere barrel and the hidden danger trying desperately to spot any aberrations. There were none. My eyes flickered at certain points, and they opened, and my pupils dilated. However, it was hard to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that this was anything out of the ordinary. I told myself that the others were not real, that they were only a byproduct of my fevered imagination, and that I was slowly losing my mind, and I probably imagined Mr. Macy and the time sphere, all of it. I didn't know how old I was, whether the time skip had elongated or shortened my life. And every time I tried brainwashing myself to stand in denial of the evidently apparent arachnid beings, my common sense kicked in and pointed out that they were a threat and that I couldn't continue to function like this. In a non-stop self-imposed cycle of reprogramming and deprogramming, that if I were to survive, I would need to ignore the barrel and accept my circumstances, accept who I'd become through the process of life, whatever my life had been exactly. I remember killing most of the staff in cold blood on that day in 2014. It's more like watching a movie someone else made, really. I guess it was the hypnosis that did that. You might not put stock into hypnosis, might consider yourself immune to manipulation. Listen to a hypnotist right now if you think that. Have them convince you that you can't stand up, or that you're floating in space, or that your tongue is melting into a liquid, or anything along those lines. See how immune you really are. I had done it myself, I think, or Mr. Macy had initiated the process and I continued it. I woke up, and instead of driving to the archive as usual, I went to Walmart in Longmont and bought a semi-automatic rifle from behind the counter. I remember it was unusually warm that day, though not unbearably hot. The crickets in the fields busily humming to themselves, the little guppies in the birch lake happily bubbling to themselves. I tested the rifle on the shores of Birch Lake. It was quiet. As I loaded it up, I thought about how normal this was, that this was unavoidable, that there were no alternatives. Every contingency had been denied me. Every road led to this one moment, this sense of being alive in the present, in the here and now. I remember seeing Scott standing near the fax machine. He had been in a state of absolute complacency since aphasia left to... He had been left in a state of absolute complacency since aphasia left to who knows where. Dear Scott, one of the first. Next to him, the adipocere barrel sat, round and full, speaking to me through the blubber. Scott knew too much. Of course he had seen them. They were right there, right in front of his eyes. I remember that when I pulled the rifle out, he didn't appear shocked or startled. He just raised his hand and backed into the corner. For a few minutes, we just looked at each other's eyes, neither of us saying a word, both of us connecting over the shared experience of what was about to take place. I remember after every one of them had been eliminated, each one of their dangerous memories permanently destroyed, I went into my office and gathered up the hundreds of tapes I had filmed of myself sleeping. They were dangerous too. They hinted at the existence of the things. I buried them, and the bodies of the staff, underneath the floor, using little more than everyday cement and my own unstoppable will. The barrel was behind the hole, and it murmured a little. Then, when the mass grave was sealed up, when the final layer of concrete dried, and everyone I had worked with for a decade or more had been permanently removed from history, the barrel gradually faded away. I was standing beneath a highway underpass, It was Denver, I think, though I can't be sure of exactly where it was. The area looked run down, and it was coated everywhere with the sound of overhead traffic. And there was a man standing about 20 feet away from me, with a stupid haircut and a checkered shirt. He was holding a camcorder over his shoulder and smiling. He looks down at the ground and picks something up, and then lets it blow away in the wind. I'm writing the same person. I'm in my villa at Orange Bay, scribbling madly on a sheet of notepad paper. Something about lawsuits, responsibility. My hands are moving faster than I can keep up with them. I put the thing into an envelope and set it out on the front porch. I hope it reaches the man with the camcorder as soon as possible. I never met him, but he will find it. Need to forget what happened, where I was, what it was, all of it, as soon as possible. Drink a pineapple daiquiri. Relax. I was Macy's Patsy, the worm on the end of a hook. He is only immortal because he uses other people to sustain his immortality, and I use other people to sustain mine. But it all goes up to him. He lives forever and used me to keep them off his trail, as a diversion. I, and all my endeavours, were nothing more than a side trip off the main road. I have to hand it to you, Macy. You knew I was suggestible. You knew when anyone is. You're very good at that. You slip through the hands of the clock like a thief, and they'll probably never find you. But they will find me. You counted on that. I'm going over to the bar to pour myself a cocktail. Hands are shaking so a little bit of the absinthe spills onto the wood grain. I wipe it up haphazardly using the corner of my shirt. Outside, the sun is fading and the waves are turning choppy. I can feel them. They're out there. It's a game of waiting now. Strata is growing, layering over itself in distinctly unnatural ways. The sky is starting to look like static. There she is, the dark lady. She's silhouetted on the shore, picking her way along the pebbles and reeds, clad from head to toe in an outdated turtleneck and slacks, straight out of a John Hughes movie. I remember I used to wear clothes like that a lifetime ago, in high school when my aunt was still alive, living each day as if it would be my last, before I understood how undesirable immortality was. She stops outside the glass, peering in at me. I'm sitting on the chaise lounge, chugging the drink down the hatch. Her reflection is difficult to make out. It's faint. She puts her hands up against the frame of the door and they create little spots of condensation. She's not one of them, but she's probably on their side. I've heard her before in my nightmares. Something about being caught during a singular moment in time, a time she regrets and doesn't want to revisit. I rise unsteady feet and tiptoe towards her, knowing that her presence here is an impossibility, that everything I've seen defies explanation. That if things went my way and this world would make sense, and I had any real control over it, I could explain who she was and how she came to be. I could devise models and formulas to predict these entities arose and why. But there's nothing scientific here, just absinthe vapours and strawberry infusions. And I've always been a pawn at the whim of the tide. Who are you? I stutter. Outside the waves crash upon the outcroppings of the volcanic rock. The resort's main building has gone completely dark, and the only indication of any human presence, save my own, is discarded umbrella 75 feet down the beach with a rainbow pattern on it. Joyce, she says, and smiles. The kind of smile you see in a yearbook or on an old celluloid photograph, which indicates an obligation to express happiness rather than a sense of genuine satisfaction. You know me, Chloe. Let me in. The glass slips from my grasp, and I make a soft thud on the carpet. Her eyes are so empty, devoid of personage. They can shapeshift, can't they? Mr. Macy said that they can alter their form if you're too impressionable. I squint, attempt to put myself back into a frame of mind where she becomes an arachnid. All I see is her grinning mug, and behind it the rain starts up. In buckets it washes and erodes the shore. She's getting drenched. Fuck it, I whisper, unbolting the latch and sliding it open. If she did come here to wipe me, that's all I deserve. That's all anyone deserves. You remember me, she giggles, as she brushes her hair from her eyes and approaches me, arms outstretched. I politely decline the hug and make my way over to the chaise lounge. She pulls up a small plastic chair and folds her arms in her lap. Her nails are painted with a tasteless magenta. She's clasping a small purse with Memphis Group design on it. Trying to remember where I saw her, but I'm drawing blanks. As if on cue, she lifts her finger to jog my memory. On tape, I scream before she can interject. You sat in that room, you talked to me, you were a fucking murderer. Get the fuck out. My eyes bolt open and the next thing I know, I'm at her throat because I remember that night at the archive, getting sucked into her world, becoming one with it. I remember the barrel and the tarp and she looked at me, the look she had given me, all-knowing, soul-piercing stare. She claws at my face, then grabs my wrist and forces me onto the floor. Without thinking, she grabs a bottle of whiskey from the cabinet and rams it against my left temple. For a while, all I can make out is her face. It looks older than it did a moment ago. She has crow's feet and less neck. It's hard to make out if this is illusionary or not. She's probably one of them. What's wrong with you, Chloe? She retorts. She sets me up on the tan polyester couch next to the potted palm I bought in the market square in Kingston upon my arrival. Don't you remember? We talked about this on the phone a week ago. I spent a lot of money to come here. The last thing I expected was you to get nasty. She heads over to the fridge and opens it, retrieving a stick of celery, and starts munching on it with vigour. I put my fingers up to my temple, and I'm bleeding profusely. Why isn't she calling 911 if she really means no harm? A movie started playing in my head, ever bit as vivid as the tape which held her. It's 1993, and I'm 17 again. This is long before the AST conference, before I looped back. I lived a normal life, always felt unfulfilled, but really did take what I had for granted. In hindsight, maybe that's where I went wrong. I'm on my way to the convenience store because the old crone has asked for another pack of cigarettes. She always switches the brand up on me. I think it's to deliberately confuse me. The sun overhead beating down for a while, I consider heading over to Catherine Albertson Park, a few blocks away, to hang out under the gazebo. Ditch the mission of the convenience store and check out the birds. I have my Walkman on me and I'm listening to something on my headphones. A synth pop track. It goes through my ears and fills my head, and I'm kind of standing in place on the sidewalk instead of walking forward, swaying back and forth. It's the sort of music the hag has discouraged me from listening to. She says I should focus on my grades. I'm so tired. Joyce is on her front porch. She's holding a glass of lemonade and watching me with interest. Those flickering eyes reflect off the surface of the cup she's holding. She's secluded there in a miniature jungle of shade beneath a wooden awning. It looks so cool under there in the darkness. Hey, kid, she exclaims, raising her hand. Do you want to make a few extra bucks? Confused, I take the headphones off, and she repeats her offer. For a while, I consider it. I've never really spoken to strangers before. In fact, I don't get out much. I've seen Joyce a few times, mostly shopping at the grocery store, in the produce section. But I don't know her, really. I don't know who she is or why she would ask me randomly to help her with something, instead of calling a carpenter or an electrician from the Yellow Pages. I'm tired, though. So tired. And that shade. Cool, she says, as I make my way up to where she's sitting. Now, before we go back, I'm going to lay down a few ground rules. You don't tell anyone about this, you do whatever I ask, and you don't put back down. Agreed? I nod, thinking whatever she has probably is pretty labor-intensive. She pulls out a crisp $100 bill and lays it flat in the middle of my palm. Without speaking or displaying my awe, I put it in my pocket and follow her to the back gate, which she unlocks. It opens onto a placid noontime landscape. There's a fence and trees on the outskirts, and mostly there's a big lawn, and in the middle of the lawn there is a large hole. 3 feet by 5 feet, maybe. 10 feet deep. She steps in behind me, looking around with nerves to ensure nobody spotted us entering, and shuts the gate. I slowly walk over to the vat. It makes a slight hissing sound as she pops the plastic lid with those perfectly manicured nails of hers. Sets the lid gingerly down on the equally manicured lawn, and I near the orifice, inch by inch. The adipocere is what greets me, the stench of death amid acidic tones, a kind of lumpy fat substance which appears to be some sort of long, dismembered facial remnant staring up at me from the depths. A mouth which has consumed its prey, and all around it the bubbles rising and popping and seething, a dark pool of liquid destruction. She allows me to get a good look at it, what's inside. A really good look. A better look than anyone else will ever receive. And then she closes it. You know what to do, kiddo, she says. Hoist it on in. With some effort, I manage to ease my trembling knuckles underneath the weight of the barrel, grip its sides and gradually lower it into the dirt. It's surprisingly light, only 90 pounds or so. She hands me the shovel and some plastic bags to wrap my hands with, and stands there with folded arms as a wry smile as I shovel the dirt in. Ounce for ounce, pound for pound, erasing a person, an entity, a name, from history and from memory. Just like recording over a tape, the audio was no longer present. It dissipated into the ether. The visuals are new. The substance has been altered. In the 1960s and 70s, wiping tapes in the television industry was common practice. Entire episodes of The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson from that period, as well as countless other programs, are impossible to view, all because they wanted to save money without buying new tapes. Record over the old ones, they said. It doesn't matter. Get it out as soon as possible. Don't worry about it. Wipe over it, reuse it, cover the hole, and done. Now there are gaps, very noticeable gaps. Memory holes. It's 2022 and I'm lying on the couch, and Joyce is there, standing over me, broken whiskey bottle held in those same perfectly manicured nails, as polished as ever, her eyes as bright as diamonds. I'm feeling the effects of blood loss, blood all over my shirt and all over the fabric. My temple has fused with the fabric, clotting up. But it's still running, spoiling out of me like a cassette deck gone haywire. My contents are unfurling and spilling, and the darkness is growing behind my cornea. Poor, poor Chloe, is one of the last things I hear. Too vindictive. I remember back in Boise, you know. I heard what they said about you behind your back. Always wanting things you couldn't achieve. Always outliving your capacity, never satisfied. I heard that from your friends and the people you thought were your friends. Sitting out regularly, you catch a lot of private conversations. Idle gossip, murmurs of discontent. Nobody ever liked you, Chloe. I contemplate my current being in the present. in the here and now, and analyse with the last remnant of what my mind the texture upon the couch, the microscopic patterns formed by the thread. The temperature of the air is tested without much effect by my fingertips, which twitch a millimetre and then lie cold. And Joyce is there, and in many ways she's the same as she's always been, fading into static, the collective maelstrom of our deceptive primate recollection, the repository of our terrible ideas and long-abandoned hope. She receives an inch every hour, holding the whiskey bottle and speaking in that strange voice which only she is capable of, the one which simultaneously unsettles and excites. I'm headed for a different area of the psyche. I'm en route to a large, dark room with a circular opening. That was quite a long story, actually, wasn't it? Okay. The name of the story was Chloe, Final Thoughts, which I guess makes sense. There's the link if you want to have a look. There's a picture as well. The picture is super weird, actually. I think it must be her dying on the sofa. But it's not like a bloody looking picture. But she's, it's very abstract. But I think that must be what it's a picture of. I should probably go to bed. I have to go to work tomorrow, but not until 4. So, well, I have to get there for 4. So I'll have to leave at 3. So I should probably get up at 2. But that's okay. I'll still get plenty of sleep. It's only 3:30. Fingers crossed, anyway. If there's anyone here, I hope you enjoyed the storytelling. And it'll be saved on YouTube as well. I'll probably maybe get it edited because I had to retake some lines. But maybe not. Maybe I'll just leave it as it is. But yeah, if it's your bedtime, I hope you sleep well. And if it's daytime for you, I hope you have a good rest of your day. Try not to think too much about Chloe. Good night.